Hello and welcome to Think Watercolour. Today's demonstration is this loose watercolour sketch of an autumnal country scene. I came across this tree with its golden leaves contrasted against some evergreen conifers whilst out walking on a bright but cloudy day quite recently. So when I got back to my studio, I made this quick small sketch whilst the scene was fresh in my memory. This is a 6" by 8" block of cold pressed 300 gram paper from Jackson's Art Supplies. It's their own brand. I was just trying out the paper to see how it takes watercolour. I like to use these small blocks for making preparatory sketches, and these ones from Jackson's are relatively inexpensive, so I don't mind if I mess things up on them. Having taped the edges of the paper just to give myself a white border when the sketch is finished, I started by simply just sketching the horizon and roughly where the conifers and the deciduous autumn tree would be, and just sketched in very loosely to indicate a fence to the right of the field. And I started by wetting the sky area with some clean water, not too much water, just enough to damp it. And then mixed up some cerulean and some cobalt blue for the blue of the sky. Just letting it blend softly into the water. And then I just used a little bit of the blue mix, adding a touch of burnt sienna just to give it a warm grey. And then I added more burnt sienna to the blue to make a slightly stronger grey. These clouds are going to dry much lighter, and I just wanted the shadows to be fairly faint because it was a really bright day, and whilst it was cloudy, they were pretty bright, and the shadows were quite soft. Once I've painted the sky, I mixed up some raw sienna for the initial wash of the foreground fields. And with some clean paper towel, I just lifted out some of the area in front of those conifers to give me a clean background to allow me to paint the autumn leaves of the tree in front of the conifers. Then using a very weak mix of jadeite green for the underpainting of the conifers, just painting the lightest lights in. Again, lifting out a little bit of the conifers there. Then I mixed up some Van Dyke brown to indicate some texture on the field and to just paint the first wash of the hedgerow to the side of the field. Just using a little bit of the texture of the paper. It's cold pressed, so it's not my usual rough paper, but there is some texture there. And if you use a dry brush technique, you can still pick up some texture. Just adding a little bit of an autumnal colour along the hedgerow there with some light red. And then adding a little bit more of the Van Dyke brown at the base. Just strengthening the left-hand side of those conifers just to indicate that they're in shadow. The light is coming from the right, so a little bit of shadow. And for the autumn leaves, the first wash, I used some pretty neat, straight out of the tube almost, cadmium yellow, just to give me a base of where the leaves are. And for this fence on the right, I've just used a fairly strong mix, straight out of the palette, of Van Dyke brown. Using a dry brush technique, letting the texture of the paper just give me a nice loose feel to the painting. This is a loose sketch, and I recommend that you try these really loose sketches. Don't be too fussy about what you're painting, and you get some really nice effects with using a dry brush technique. I'm just using a rigger, same thing again, using almost a dry bruch technique, very little paint on the brush. and just gives a nice effect of sort of making the fence look a little bit old and weathered worn. Just darkening a few areas on the conifers and giving a little bit more detail just to define them a little bit more. Making sure I don't paint too much over where the autumn leaves are going to be in that foreground tree. Just hinting at shadow behind that tree. Again, using some of that light red with a touch of pyrrole orange mixed in, just to paint the brightest orange and golden colours. These will dry a little bit lighter. Just using some fairly neat raw sienna for some just foreground colour. I want to bring the eye forward a little bit into this right hand corner, and just, you know, it leads the eye into the painting. You know, the eye travels along the fence. I'm just adding a little bit more of the autumnal colour there, of the light red and touch of pyrrole orange. Once more, I dried the whole painting with a hairdryer very quickly before continuing. I'm just painting in the branches of the foreground tree with its autumnal colours using a rigger, and some it's a bit of neutral tint added to the Van Dyke brown, just for the tree trunks and the branches, just to create a little bit of contrast in the distance there. The trick is not to overdo it with the branches on the trees. You have to know when to stop. Sometimes it's not so easy to know, but just adding a little bit more depth to those fence posts. Here I use some lemon yellow, pretty much straight out of the tube, for the lightest leaves on the autumn tree. And just adding a little bit more of the pyrrole orange, just to add a little bit more variety. And again, just suggesting some fallen leaves on the ground beneath the trees. Finally, just adding a little more autumnal colour to those distant trees. Just using a rigger to add a little bit more detail to the foreground on the field there. Just a tip when you're painting a scene like this, the further away things are, the less detail you'll see, so always paint more detail in the foreground. For the fence, I'm just adding a little bit of shadow, just a hint of the light coming from the right. Not too much. Fairly weak sky, so the shadows wouldn't be very strong. And just darkening that right hand field. And I think I'm done. I have to say I'm pretty impressed with the Jackson's watercolour block. The paper really handles watercolour very well, and there's a nice texture, not too much texture, but it's just right for a cold press paper. As far as the painting goes, I'm quite happy with the sketch. The clouds have come out really well. They're nice and light, and not too much detail. I think I've conveyed a nice bright autumn day. I do hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, do give it a like. It really helps with spreading the word on YouTube. If you're not a subscriber, do subscribe for future videos and hit the notification bell for when I post them. And once more, thanks for watching.